Hey there! Welcome to my PowerPoint presentation on Kayo, Underhanded Cheat, a hero for bad cheaters. Kayo Underhanded Cheat, or RKO, is a reviled brute hero introduced in Super Slam. He has 4 intellect, 40 HP, and 3 parts to his hero ability. The first part says, you start the game with 1 weapon zone. The third part says, whenever the crowd boos you, create a vigor token. The second part, which I have saved for last, says instant, pay 4 resources, tap him. Target attack action card you control has 6 base power. If it bothers you that I read them out of order, leave your complaints in the comments below. I'll pass them on to my HR department. RKO tends to play a more mid-range game plan, and as a reviled hero, his goal is to stay above you in life the whole game. The first part of RKO's hero ability, you start the game with 1 weapon zone, has a very big impact on how the hero plays. On the surface, all this means is he can't run a 2-handed weapon or dual wield. However, these are not all of the consequences of the text. As a mid-range deck, he wants to present either a 2-handed weapon or a 1-handed weapon that allow him to convert one hand to a breakpoint, and if he's on a one-hander, either a shield or maybe Arcane Lantern. Since he only has 1 hand, his weapon choices are very limited. Before Kayo Armed and Dangerous LL'd, RKO was happy to run Mandible Claw to gain an extra action point here and there. After Armed and Dangerous took Mandible Claws with him to the Great LL in the Sky, RKO was effectively forced into running Savage Claw. It's just a worse Mandible Claw, since it doesn't get you the extra AP that Mandible Claws got you every once in a while, and every so often pretends it's a Titan's Fist. The second and third of RKO's abilities make him one of, if not the most, mid-range heroes in the game. Vigor is incredibly powerful, and his ability to effectively create them at will allows him to set up some truly value-breaking plays. There are 3 core plays you'll see RKO pull off with his Vigor tokens. The first is Mocking Blow plus a blue. He'll attack with the Mocking Blow and use the blue plus Vigor token to activate his hero ability and send a 2-card 8 to 10, depending on the color. The best part of this is, it actually creates another Vigor to just continue the pain train turn after turn. Another play he can do with the Vigor token is to send a blue Nimby. Nimby will then search a blue Nimblism, which he can use with the Vigor resource to activate his hero ability for a 1-card 6. Off a 0-cost blue, that's pretty good. Finally, one of my favorite things to do with RKO is to set up a Vigor the turn before my Tunic hits 3. This will allow me to keep one of RKO's 9 2-for-8s. Now, I don't know if you've ever blocked 9 and sent a 1-card 8, but my Lanta is that gas. That's not where his hero ability stops, though. One of the disadvantages that mid-range decks have is that they can run low on damage as the game goes late. However, where other mid-range decks eventually devolve into random weak blues, RKO's blues are all technically 6 power attacks thanks to his ability. This allows him to put a lot more pressure on heroes in the late game as compared to other mid-range decks. Ultimately, RKO has an incredible ability to just keep the pain train rolling once he starts, because the vigors he can create allow him to just put so much defensive capability up while still keeping his offense going. I'm starting a Patreon for those who want to join. I'm never going to paywall my content, so you don't have to worry about that. It's a Patreon for those who want to support and allow me to expand what I'm doing. It'll give you access to the ability to vote on longer form content starting in September, plus access to submitting videos for VOD reviews, which will all be posted to my channel, and shoutouts in my videos. All the tiers get the same perks, and the lowest is $3. In the vein of expanding what I'm doing, at 20 Patreon subscribers, I'll start streaming some Talishar and maybe video creation. You can find my Patreon at patreon.com/hereticfab and in the description. I'm also still supported by Majestic Arena, since it's still my LGS and he's still supporting our local community with an incredible place to play. But he's at least responded to me and confirmed it's me he believes in. Now that he's confirmed his belief in me, it's safe to check him out at Transient TCG on Discord or TCG Player, or soonly enough at majesticarena.com. It'll also show more belief in what I'm doing. I don't know if I can keep stuff like this in, but when I switched to this slide, I just started laughing. I don't know, I find this slide funny. Anyway, I want to spend some time talking about RKO's card options, since I honestly like the cards he uses. First, I want to talk about some of his armor slots. The first armor slot I want to talk about is his head slot. I see a lot of people running Scowling Fleshbag, but I prefer running Two-Faced. There are some ups and downs to each headpiece, and I think it deserves some discussion. Scowling Fleshbag is one of the most disruptive defensive pieces of equipment in the game. At any time you want, you simply block with it and remove a random card from your opponent's hand until the end of the turn. It forces your opponent to keep extra cards in their hand for the possibility of dodging the Intimidate. It also blocks too. However, I assert that Two-Face is a better helmet for him. Sure, Two-Face blocks for one less, and leaves your opponent with the same number of cards in hand. However, the fact that Two-Face allows RKO to choose the card he wants to remove means that they can't play around the effect. They just have to hope that the card they draw off the top replaces the card RKO took from them. Certainly, there are plenty of decks that don't have powerful spike cards, and instead each card is just a head jab or something akin to it. Against those decks, Fleshbag is indeed better, since those decks are just critical mass decks. At the end of the day, Fleshbag is a more aggressive card, and doesn't actually remove the problem card your opponent was trying to hit you with. The biggest impact Fleshbag has is that it delays the problem, so you can kill your opponent before they can make an issue out of that problem card again. However, RKO doesn't necessarily end games quickly. Your opponent will likely have the opportunity to send the same card you were trying to avoid, so removing a card has a bigger impact than simply delaying the issue. Additionally, in the event that RKO finds himself in a fatigue scenario, you trade your head slot for removing an additional card from your opponent's deck, which can be the difference between winning and losing the game. Man, I love how tight the design of Fab is. The second slot I want to talk about is his arm slot. RKO doesn't run enough 6s to make Gauntlet of Tyrannical Rex worth it, but there's a real conversation to be had about Apex Bonebreakers versus Line Crossers. In a perfect world, you register both, just like with the head slot. However, if you have to choose one, I assert that the choice is Apex Bonebreaker. Line Crossers definitely help with the mid-range mirror, but RKO already has tools in his deck to break the mid-range matchup. Instead, Apex Bonebreakers allow him to keep the life lead against aggressive decks. Since aggro decks end the game faster, RKO has less opportunity to regain the life lead should he ever lose it. The extra 2 block on Bonebreakers, plus the ideally 2 extra offensive value, buying him 4 extra life difference is massive in these aggressive matchups. Now I want to talk about some of the cards he uses in his main deck. One of RKO's unique cards, Steal Victory, is one of my favorite cards in the entire game. Stealing a single aura token might not seem very powerful, and certainly there are plenty of heroes against whom RKO cannot steal a token, for whatever reason. However, when Steal Victory hits, it hits hard. Against Fang, it can destroy the value of their turn, and against Vincent, it can fully end their turn. I've actually killed a Vincent with the rune chance my Steal Victory stole from them, which might be my favorite win ever. Even when Steal Victory doesn't have such impact, stealing a random token just generates extra value for the mid-range deck. Additionally, I really enjoy registering Rotten Remains in RKO. Since a lot of his attacks are 1 power, he has plenty of gas in his own graveyard for the card. And Rotten Remains has surprising text in multiple matchups that you wouldn't really expect. It's not necessarily the flashiest card, but I think it's a very underappreciated card, just waiting for the right decks to prey on. Finally, Outside Interference is a mid-range player's dream. The ability to convert the card into anything you need it to be just gives the hero so much flexibility in how he plays, and really allows an individual player to express their skill. So how does RKO win games? As I stated before, he's a mid-range Revile deck, so his goal is to get a life lead early in the game and simply ride the huge amount of value he generates to keep that life lead while he walks both heroes down. Cards like Sigil of Solace and Fiddler's Green are key to his strategy, since there are many decks that will go out of their way to block more than they necessarily need to in order to keep RKO from gaining the life lead. Once he gains the lead though, he does an incredible job of keeping it. All of the value plays I talked about earlier give him access to absurd full turn value, which allows him to keep the lead and thus the absurd value he continues to generate. Additionally, he almost exclusively runs Scabskin Leathers, which defeats one of the downsides of mid-range or slow decks. RKO does not naturally have incredible access to Go Again, and can definitely look at a 5-card hand that only has 1 AP in the whole thing. His ability to roll Scabbies and still be able to convert his whole hand, again at often an incredible rate, really breaks certain matchups wide open. In fact, I've often won mid-range matchups by keeping a hand of a blue, a resource from Tunic or a Vigor, and 2 2 for 8s, and saying, well, if I get 2 AP, I get to send a 3-card 16 and just win the game from there, and if I don't, well, I was probably behind anyway, so I was losing that game. I wrote a little bit about modularity on cards. Feel free to pause the video and give it a read if you like. How do you beat such a mid-range powerhouse then? The easiest way is to get above him in life. If he loses the life lead, he suddenly has to get a lot more aggressive, which his hands can't always do. Additionally, all of the extra value he usually gets from his cards just goes up in a puff of smoke. So not only does he have to work extra hard to regain the life lead, he also has to do it with many of his cards transformed from incredibly powerful to incredibly weak. Plus, it's usually pretty obvious when RKO is going to activate his hero ability. He's not actually a good cheater. RKO is a very snowball-based hero, so if you stop the snowball from starting, it will never materialize. Another way to beat RKO is to take advantage of the fact that he tends to run defensively. Many of his hands ask him to roll scabbies for full conversion, and he's on a number of defensive cards that don't necessarily send damage. If he gains tempo, there's a good chance he can only use 2 of the cards in his hand, and sometimes he uses them to swing for exactly 3. Plus, there's always the chance he rolls a 1 on scabbies and just does nothing. Finally, he struggles against decks that can accrue value on the board. His whole shtick is incredible turn-over-turn value, and decks that can store value on board can eventually get to a point where they're generating more value than him. Again, once he falls behind in the value race, it's very, very difficult for him to claw it back. In conclusion, RKO is a very mid-range deck, and you should absolutely play him. Harkening back to my last video, the effects on block cards are really cool, and I really like them. Steal Victory is an incredible card with a very unique effect. I think the inherent disadvantages of block cards allow LSS to print some very interesting effects on them, and I'm excited to see what they do in the future. Good fun and have luck in your next game.